My sister, my only sister, she was called Annette, and she was killed in a road traffic accident when she was 30. She and her husband and three little girls were on their way back from a wedding in a little car, a little Fiat car, and a lorry, an articulated lorry, was coming in the opposite direction. And the driver said afterwards he knew it was going to happen and he didn't know what to do about it. And the whole lorry tipped over sideways just as it passed my sister's car and crushed it. The only survivor was the youngest child, Madeline, who was lying in a carry cot in the back of the, sort of in the boot of the car. Well, nowadays they wouldn't, you wouldn't be allowed to have a baby lying like that. It would be in a little seat in the car, and she would have been killed too. But in those days, you could put your baby in a carry cot in the back of the car. Anyway, one child was still alive, but the other child and the parents were both dead. Somebody came rushing out of the garage they were passing and took the baby out of the back of the car. She was 1.5. Took the other child to hospital, where she died. And then the baby, Madeline, Maggie we called her, came to live in my family because I already had 4 children and she just fitted in nicely at the end of the family. My sister and I were best friends as well as being sisters, and we did everything together. She was 2 years younger than me, so she sort of copied everything I did, really. And when I became an actor, she decided she wanted to be an actor too. There was one period in our lives when we lived about a mile apart from each other, and this was the time when we were both having babies. We had them quite quickly, alternately. And one day, my sister and I used to be always walking from one house to the other, pushing a baby in the buggy, her to me or me to her. And one day we were both walking along together, and this man stopped us and he said, "Oh, thank God there are 2 of you." We said, "Why?" He said, "Because I'm always seeing this woman and she's always pregnant and the baby never comes." And anyway, that just shows how alike we were and how much we had in common. While she was an actress, she started working with puppets as well. First of all, she worked with this very interesting old man called Bernard, who used to travel the country with a van full of puppets and do shows. And then she started working for Jerry and Sylvia Anderson, who made loads and loads of puppet films, including the first one she worked on was Four Feather Falls, Supercar, Torchy Torchy the Battery Boy, and the most famous one of all was I can't remember the name of it. Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds. She didn't work on Thunderbirds. She'd left by then. And after she'd left this company, she decided it would be really quite nice to have her own puppets, and she started making her own puppets and doing shows in theatres and children's parties and all sorts of things. The first puppet she made, she called Mr. Wubbager, and this was because she came to visit us we were living in Northern Ireland at the time, and my eldest child, who was about 3 and had a strong Belfast accent, and he was shouting at another little boy in the road, and he shouted down, "You wee bugger!" And because he was such an angelic looking little boy with blonde hair, my sister thought this was terribly funny, this little creature shouting out, "You wee bugger." And so she called her first puppet Mr. Wubbager. Now, when we brought Maggie back to our house and she came to live with us, we also bought the puppets, which were all in my sister's house, and I brought all the puppets with me. And hung them up in a cupboard in my room. And every time I opened the cupboard, I'd see all these little bodies hanging there. And they looked like little dead bodies, really. And we found it quite disturbing. And then eventually my eldest daughter had a boyfriend who said, "Oh, I could restring all those puppets for you. Give them to me and I'll restring them." So we gave them all to him, and I was quite glad to get them out of the house, really. But then he broke up with my daughter and sort of vanished from our lives. And then 25 years later, he was being Father Christmas at Harrods. And on his way to Harrods, he fell down dead with a heart attack. Well, we went to his funeral, which was down in Dorset. We met his then girlfriend that he was living with, and we said to her, "If ever you come across some puppets, they're ours." But we didn't think, because Seamus, the boyfriend, had moved around. He'd lived in vans. He was a busker. He'd lived quite a homeless sort of life, and we didn't really think he could possibly have kept the puppets all those years. But sure enough, she rang us up a few days later and said, "I've found the puppets." So we went down and collected them, and so now we've got the puppets, and we're gradually restoring them a little bit, and it sort of feels as if they've come home.